The rain fell in silver sheets against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti penthouse, blurring the glittering Milan skyline into streaks of liquid gold. Inside, warmth and wealth wrapped around every surface. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the scent of expensive wine and fresh roses. Lucia Moretti stood near the grand piano, her hand resting on the curve of her stomach where new life grew, watching her husband adjust his cufflinks in the mirror. He looked devastating in his tailored black suit. He always did. But tonight, something felt different. The air felt thin. Wrong. When the elevator doors opened and Serena Valenti stepped out in a crimson dress that clung to every curve, Lucia understood. She understood everything. Alessandro didn't look at his wife as he crossed the room. He didn't acknowledge the baby growing inside her. He simply offered Serena his arm, murmured something that made the blonde woman laugh, and walked toward the elevator. The sound of Serena's heels echoed like a countdown. Click, click, click. Lucia's champagne glass trembled slightly in her fingers. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply watched the man she loved disappear with another woman, and felt her entire world collapse in absolute silence. Months later, Alessandro Moretti would see his wife again. She would be wearing emerald silk, her chestnut hair cascading over bare shoulders, her hazel eyes bright with something he no longer recognized. And she would be smiling up at Matteo de Rossi, the one man Alessandro hated more than death itself. Before we continue, I want you to know that this story exists because of you. Your support means everything. Please like, share, and subscribe so more stories like this can reach others who need them. The night Alessandro left, Lucia stood motionless for exactly 17 minutes. She counted them, each second stretched like taffy, pulling at her chest until breathing became a conscious effort. The champagne glass eventually slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, but she barely registered the sound. She was too busy replaying the way Alessandro hadn't looked at her. Not once. Not even a glance. The penthouse felt cavernous now. All those beautiful things, the art, the flowers, the carefully curated luxury, suddenly looked like props in someone else's life. A life she'd apparently been borrowing without realizing the loan had an expiration date. Her hand moved to her stomach again. 12 weeks. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him. She'd imagined candlelight, his hands on her belly, that rare, genuine smile he only showed her when they were alone. Now she imagined nothing. The housekeeper, Maria, found her an hour later, still standing in the same spot, surrounded by broken glass. The older woman took one look at Lucia's face and asked no questions. She simply guided her employer's wife to the bedroom, helped her change into something soft, and brought her warm tea that Lucia couldn't taste. "Should I call someone, Signora?" Maria asked gently. Lucia shook her head. "Who would I call?" The question hung in the air, ugly and honest. She had no family left. Her parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago, just months before she met Alessandro at a charity gala. She'd been drowning in grief and he'd been magnetic, powerful, safe somehow despite his reputation. He'd swept her into his world with an intensity that had felt like being chosen by a god. Now she understood. Gods didn't love. They collected. And when they grew bored with their collections, they simply walked away. The first week passed in a haze. Lucia slept too much, ate too little, and avoided mirrors because she couldn't stand to see what weakness looked like. Alessandro's staff moved around her like ghosts. Their eyes full of pity, they were too professional to voice. She knew they'd heard things. Rumors traveled fast in the Moretti household. By the second week, the tabloids caught wind. Moretti heir spotted with mystery blonde. Trouble in the Moretti marriage? Serena Valenti, the woman who stole Milan's most dangerous bachelor. Lucia found a stack of newspapers on the kitchen counter, placed there by someone who was either thoughtless or cruel. She forced herself to look at every photograph. Alessandro and Serena at a restaurant, Serena's hand on his chest, his arm around her waist at a gallery opening. They looked perfect together, two beautiful, ruthless creatures who belonged in the same orbit. She looked down at her tea and felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt something unfurling beneath the numbness. Something quiet and cold that had teeth. Alessandro didn't come home. Days turned into weeks, and the penthouse remained exactly as he'd left it, except for the spaces where Lucia quietly began to erase herself. She moved her things from the master bedroom to a guest suite. She stopped wearing the jewelry he'd given her. She ate meals alone in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room, as if acknowledging she no longer belonged at the main table. The baby grew anyway. 16 weeks, then 18, then 20. She went to her doctor's appointments alone, sitting in waiting rooms full of happy couples and feeling like a ghost. The ultrasound technician told her the baby was healthy. Perfect heartbeat. Perfect development. A girl. Lucia cried for the first time since the night he left. She cried because her daughter would be perfect, and her father wouldn't know. She cried because she was building a human being alone in a body that felt like a borrowed house. She cried because somewhere across Milan, Alessandro was probably laughing at something Serena said, completely unaware that his legacy was forming fingers and toes inside a woman he'd discarded. When the tears stopped, something else began. The transformation started small. Lucia began eating properly, not for herself but for the baby. She started walking through the penthouse gardens each morning, breathing fresh air, letting sunlight touch her skin. She stopped reading the tabloids. She stopped caring what they said. Her body changed. Her belly rounded, firm and undeniable. Her cheeks regained their color. Her hair thickened and gleamed. Pregnancy suited her in ways that felt almost cruel, given the circumstances. She was becoming more beautiful in direct proportion to how abandoned she felt. At 24 weeks, she made a decision. She called a lawyer. Marco Benedetti was not what Lucia expected. He was younger than she'd imagined, mid-30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen worse than a pregnant woman wanting to protect herself from her powerful husband. "You're not seeking divorce?" he asked, reviewing her documents in his sleek office. "Not yet." Lucia's hands rested on her belly. "I want to understand my options. I want to know what I'm entitled to. And I want to make sure my daughter is protected, no matter what happens." Marco studied her for a long moment. "You understand that Alessandro Moretti is not a man who takes kindly to being legally challenged. I understand who my husband is. Do you?" The question wasn't unkind. "Mrs. Moretti, I've represented several clients who've tried to navigate situations with powerful families. It rarely ends quickly, or quietly." Lucia met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not looking for quick. I'm not looking for quiet. I'm looking for leverage." Something shifted in Marco's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Then let's get you some leverage." The papers were filed discreetly. Not divorce papers, not yet. Just groundwork, asset documentation, custody frameworks, a paper trail that would become a fortress if she needed it. Lucia told no one what she was doing. She continued living in the penthouse, eating meals prepared by Alessandro's staff, sleeping in his guest room, growing his child. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer waiting for him to come back. She was preparing for war. Alessandro returned to the penthouse on a Tuesday evening, exactly 6 weeks after he'd left. Lucia heard the elevator open from the kitchen, where she was making herself tea. Her hand didn't tremble as she set down the kettle. Her heart didn't race. She simply turned to face the doorway and waited. He appeared like a shadow solidifying, taller than she remembered, somehow, broader. His gray eyes swept the kitchen, found her and stopped. For one fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something darker. Then the mask slid back into place. "Lucia. Alessandro." His gaze dropped to her belly, now unmistakably round beneath her cream cashmere sweater, and stayed there. The silence stretched so long that Lucia could hear the clock ticking in the next room. "You're pregnant," he said finally. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "Yes." "How far along?" 26 weeks. He did the math. She watched it happen, watched him calculate backwards and realized that she'd been pregnant the night he left. That she'd known. That she'd been carrying his child while he walked out the door with another woman. Something shifted in his jaw. A muscle tightened. Released. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask. The words hung between them like blades. Alessandro crossed the kitchen slowly, each step deliberate, until he stood close enough that she could smell his cologne. The familiar scent made her stomach lurch. Whether from longing or revulsion, she couldn't tell anymore. I would have. What? She kept her voice soft, controlled. Come back? Chosen me? Done the right thing out of obligation rather than love. She shook her head. I didn't want that. I don't want that now. His eyes darkened. What do you want? Nothing from you. The answer landed like a slap. She watched him absorb it, watched confusion and anger and something almost like hurt cycle through his expression before settling into cold neutrality. You're carrying my child, he said, as if reminding her. I'm carrying my child. Her hand curved protectively over her belly. You forfeited your claim when you walked out with her. Lucia, don't. The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. Don't say my name like you still have the right to it. Don't look at me like I owe you explanations. You made your choice, Alessandro. Live with it. She stepped around him and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing alone among the marble and the moonlight. It was the first battle she'd won. It wouldn't be the last. Alessandro moved back into the penthouse. He claimed it was for the baby. He claimed he needed to be present for the pregnancy. He claimed a lot of things, but Lucia noticed he never claimed to have ended things with Serena. The tabloids certainly didn't suggest he had. If anything, the blonde woman's presence in his life seemed to have intensified. More public appearances, more photographs, more whispered rumors about the Moretti marriage being over in everything but name. Lucia watched it all with detached interest, like a scientist observing an experiment. This is what humiliation looks like, she thought. This is what abandonment feels like when it's happening in slow motion, publicly, with witnesses. She should have been devastated. Instead, she found herself getting stronger. The nursery was finished in early November. Lucia had designed it herself. Soft gray walls, white furniture, touches of rose gold that caught the light. It was elegant without being cold, warm without being cloying. Maria had helped her assemble the crib, and they'd spent an entire afternoon arranging and rearranging stuffed animals until everything felt perfect. Alessandro appeared in the doorway one evening and stood there, watching. It's beautiful, he said. Lucia didn't turn around. She was folding tiny onesies, each one softer than the last. Thank you. I could have hired designers. I didn't want designers. You didn't have to do this alone. Now she turned. Actually, I did. He was wearing a dark sweater, no suit tonight, no armor. It made him look younger, softer, almost human. She didn't trust it. I've made arrangements, he said, stepping into the room. Doctors, security, everything the baby will need. I've made my own arrangements. Lucia, I appreciate your concern. She kept her voice polite, professional. But I've been handling this pregnancy alone for 6 months. I think I can manage the rest. It's not about managing. His voice dropped, taking on an edge. It's about what's best for my child. Our child. She folded another onesie. And what's best for her is a mother who isn't constantly reminded of her humiliation. What's best for her is peace, stability, consistency. She finally looked at him. None of which you've demonstrated an ability to provide. The words hit their mark. She watched his jaw tighten, his hands curl into fists at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might actually yell at her, something he'd never done in 3 years of marriage. Instead, he turned and walked out without another word. Lucia went back to folding onesies. Her hands were shaking, but only a little. The charity gala was Matteo de Rossi's idea. Or at least, it happened at an event he was hosting. A lavish fundraiser for children's hospitals, held in a restored palazzo that dripped with old money and new influence. Half of Milan's elite would be there, including, according to the rumor mill, Alessandro Moretti. Lucia wasn't planning to attend. She was 32 weeks pregnant, exhausted, and had zero interest in being displayed as the tragic abandoned wife at a society event. But then a hand-delivered invitation arrived at the penthouse, accompanied by a note that simply said, "Sometimes the best revenge is showing them what they gave up." She didn't know Matteo de Rossi. They'd met briefly at a few events over the years. He was impossible to miss, with his dark eyes and quiet intensity, but they'd never spoken beyond polite formalities. His reputation preceded him. Powerful, dangerous, and locked in a long-standing rivalry with the Moretti family that dated back generations. His invitation was audacious. It was also brilliant. Lucia studied the embossed cardstock for a long time. Then she called her stylist. The emerald gown was designed specifically for her. It flowed like water over her curves, accentuating her belly rather than hiding it. The fabric caught the light with every movement, making her look like a goddess of the sea. Her chestnut hair was swept over one shoulder in soft waves. Minimal jewelry, just diamond drops at her ears and a delicate bracelet. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger. A beautiful stranger. Powerful stranger. Someone who didn't need Alessandro Moretti to feel worthy. Matteo met her at the entrance. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of espresso. His suit was impeccable, his presence commanding without being aggressive. When he offered her his arm, his smile was small but genuine. "You came. You asked. I didn't think you would." Lucia placed her hand on his arm, feeling the strength beneath the expensive fabric. "Neither did I." They walked into the gala together, and the room went silent. Not literally. The orchestra kept playing, the champagne kept flowing, but a ripple passed through the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers started. Phone screens glowed as people captured the moment. Lucia Moretti, pregnant, abandoned, humiliated, on the arm of Matteo de Rossi. It was a declaration of war. Alessandro was standing near the bar when they entered. She saw him before he saw her, watched his posture stiffen as the whispers reached him, watched him turn with a glass of whiskey halfway to his lips. The glass stopped. His entire body stopped. For 3 full seconds, he simply stared. Lucia knew exactly what he was seeing. Not the broken woman he'd left behind. Not the ghost who'd haunted his penthouse in silence. He was seeing someone transformed. Someone radiant. Someone who'd clearly decided she didn't need him. And she was with Matteo. The muscle in Alessandro's jaw twitched so hard she could see it from across the room. Then Serena appeared at his side, all blonde hair and red lips, and the moment shattered. Lucia turned away, focusing on Matteo, who was watching the whole exchange with barely concealed amusement. "That was even more satisfying than I imagined," he murmured. "You planned this. I suggested it. You chose to accept." His dark eyes found hers. "And you did it magnificently. Why help me? Perhaps I enjoy watching powerful men lose control. Or perhaps you're using me to hurt him." Matteo's smile didn't waver. "Does it matter? The result is the same. You looked like a queen tonight, Lucia." And he looked like a man who just realized he made the worst mistake of his life. She shouldn't have been pleased. She was anyway. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne she couldn't drink and conversations she couldn't follow. Matteo stayed close, not possessively, but protectively. He introduced her to people, made her laugh, treated her like she was valuable rather than discarded. And all the while, she felt Alessandro's gaze burning into her back like a brand. He didn't approach, didn't speak to her, just watched. By midnight, Lucia's feet ached and her back protested. Matteo noticed immediately, guiding her toward a quiet alcove where they could sit. "You're tired. I'm pregnant. It's a constant state. I'll have my driver take you home whenever you're ready." He hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer to avoid the penthouse tonight. I have guest suites that are completely private." The offer was innocent. She could see that in his eyes. But she also knew how it would look if anyone found out. "Thank you, but I should go home." "Of course." He stood, offering his hand. "This doesn't have to be the last time, you know? The gala. The partnership. Partnership. Against a common enemy. His smile turned sharp. Alessandro Moretti has taken things from both of us. Maybe it's time he learned what losing feels like. Lucia took his hand and let him help her stand. I'll think about it. She was almost at the exit when Alessandro caught her. His hand closed around her arm. Not hard, but firm enough to stop her. When she turned, his face was a mask of barely controlled fury. What are you doing? Leaving. With him. My ride is waiting. I don't. He stopped himself, drew a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more dangerous. You're carrying my child. You're my wife. And you spent the entire evening on the arm of my enemy. You spent the past 3 months with your mistress. Lucia kept her voice steady. I'd say we're even. This isn't a game. No. She pulled her arm free. It isn't. It's my life. And I'm finally choosing to live it without you. She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. I won't let you leave with him. Lucia looked back over her shoulder. Alessandro's gray eyes were blazing. His hands clenched at his sides. He looked exactly like what he was. A powerful man on the verge of losing something he'd only just realized he wanted. You don't get to let me do anything, she said softly. You gave that up. This time, when she walked away, he didn't follow. The car ride home was silent. Matteo had disappeared discreetly. A brief squeeze of her hand, a murmured promise to call, and now Lucia sat alone in the back of the Moretti vehicle, watching Milan blur past her window. The driver was one of Alessandro's men, which meant everything that had happened tonight would be reported. She didn't care. Actually, that wasn't true. She cared intensely. She wanted Alessandro to know every detail. She wanted him to lie awake imagining her with Matteo, imagining her smiling and laughing and being treated like something precious. She wanted him to feel exactly what she'd felt for months, the sharp, endless ache of being replaced. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. You were magnificent tonight. He won't sleep for a week. She shouldn't have smiled. She did anyway. Alessandro was waiting for her when she arrived at the penthouse. He stood in the center of the living room like a storm that hadn't yet broken, still in his formal clothes, whiskey glass clenched in his fist. The lights were low. The rain had started again, streaking the windows with silver. Where is he? Lucia set down her clutch. Who? Don't. The word cracked through the air. Don't pretend. Don't lie. Where is Matteo de Rossi? Probably at his own home. I wouldn't know. You left with him. I left in a car. He was not in it. Alessandro crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just inches from her. This close, she could see the fury in his eyes, and beneath it, something that looked almost like panic. What is he to you? A friend. He's not your friend. He's using you to get to me. Perhaps. She met his gaze without flinching. Does that bother you? You're my wife. I'm aware. Then act like it. The command hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Lucia reached up and slowly, deliberately, removed her earrings. Then her bracelet. Each piece clinked against the marble side table. I spent 3 years acting like your wife, she said quietly. Smiling when you needed me to smile. Hosting your dinners. Wearing your clothes. Being beautiful and silent and utterly devoted. She looked at him. And then you walked out with another woman while your child grew inside me. So forgive me, Alessandro, if I've stopped performing on command. His jaw worked. I made a mistake. You made a choice. I'm trying to fix it. By what? Moving back in? Playing at being a concerned father. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You haven't touched me in months. You haven't asked about the baby. You haven't shown any indication that you actually want to be here. You just want to make sure no one else is. That's not, isn't it? She stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. You saw me with Matteo and suddenly you care. Suddenly I matter. Suddenly our child deserves attention. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What does that tell you about yourself, Alessandro? He grabbed her arm again. pulling her close enough that their breath mingled. I don't want him near you. I don't care what you want. Lucia, let me go. His grip tightened for a fraction of a second, possessive, almost desperate, and then he released her, stepped back. His chest was heaving, his control visibly cracking at the edges. This isn't over, he said. You're right. Lucia picked up her clutch and walked toward the guest wing. It's just beginning. The next morning, everything changed. Lucia woke to cramping. Not severe, not yet, but enough to make her catch her breath. She lay very still in the bed, one hand pressed to her belly, counting seconds between spasms. The baby was moving, which was good, normal, but the cramping continued. She called her doctor. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know if they're contractions. They're just cramps. Any bleeding? No. Okay, I want you to come in. Can someone drive you? Lucia thought about Alessandro somewhere in the penthouse, probably hungover and brooding. I'll take a car. Don't drive yourself. Have someone. I'll take a car, she repeated. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The hospital was a blur of monitors and concerned faces. Dr. Ricci met her in the examination room, her calm professionalism doing little to ease Lucia's growing terror. The ultrasound wand pressed against her belly. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, fast and strong, and Lucia nearly sobbed with relief. She's okay, Dr. Ricci said, but you're showing signs of early labor. We need to discuss bed rest. Early labor? I'm only 32 weeks, which is why we're being careful. The doctor removed the wand and helped Lucia sit up. Your stress levels are elevated. Your blood pressure is higher than I'd like. The baby is healthy, but your body is telling you it needs rest. How much rest? Complete bed rest. At least 2 weeks. Then we'll reassess. Lucia stared at her. I can't. You can, or you risk premature delivery. Dr. Ricci's gaze was kind but firm. I know your situation is complicated, but right now, your daughter needs you to stop fighting and start resting. Alessandro appeared at the hospital within an hour. Lucia didn't know who had called him. Maria, probably, or one of his countless staff. But suddenly he was there in the doorway of her hospital room, looking like he hadn't slept. His suit was rumpled. His gray eyes were wild. What happened? I'm fine. The doctor said. I'm fine. She adjusted the hospital blankets over her belly. It was a scare. Everything is under control. Under control? He crossed to her bedside, and up close, she could see the fear beneath the anger. You went into early labor, alone, in a hospital across the city, and you didn't think to call me? Why would I? The question stopped him cold. Because I'm the father, he said, but his voice cracked on the words. You're a lot of things, Alessandro. Father isn't one you've earned yet. He sank into the chair beside her bed, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you need me to do? The question was so unexpected that Lucia didn't answer immediately. She studied his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble thickening along his jaw, the way his hands gripped his knees like he was trying not to reach for her. I need to be on bed rest, she said finally. 2 weeks minimum. Done. I'll arrange everything. I don't need you to arrange. Let me do this. His voice was low, urgent. Please, let me take care of you. Even if you hate me, even if you never forgive me, let me keep you safe. She should have said no. She should have called Matteo, arranged to stay somewhere else, removed herself from Alessandro's orbit entirely. Instead, she looked at the fear in his eyes, the first real emotion she'd seen from him in months, and felt something crack inside her. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The next 2 weeks were strange. Alessandro transformed. He canceled meetings, rearranged his schedule, installed himself in the penthouse like a guardian rather than a ghost. He didn't try to share her bedroom, but he appeared at her door every morning with tea. He sat with her during meals. He read aloud to her from books about pregnancy, his voice low and steady, pausing whenever she laughed at his pronunciation of medical terms. It was confusing. It was infuriating. It was making her remember why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. "You're doing this because of Matteo," she said one evening, when he brought her dinner on a tray. Alessandro paused, the tray balanced in his hands. "What?" "The attention, the care. It's because you're jealous. It's because I almost lost you. You did lose me." He set the tray on her bedside table. "Then maybe I'm trying to find you again." "And Serena?" The name landed like a slap. Alessandro's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "It's over." "Since when?" "Since the gala. Since I saw you with him and realized what I'd thrown away." He sat on the edge of her bed, close enough to touch but careful not to. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not expecting anything. I need you to know that it's over. That it was a mistake I'll spend the rest of my life regretting." Lucia stared at him. She wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that still remembered candlelit dinners and whispered promises and the way he used to hold her like she was something sacred, wanted desperately to believe him. But the other part remembered Serena's hand on his chest. The photographs. The months of silence. "I can't trust you," she said quietly. "I know. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. I know that too. Then why are you here?" Alessandro reached out, slowly, and rested his hand on her belly. The baby kicked against his palm, and his breath caught. "Because she's mine," he said. "And so are you. Even if you hate me. Even if you never let me back in." His gray eyes met hers. "You're mine, Lucia. And I'm done pretending otherwise." The call came 3 days later. Lucia was resting in bed, half watching a documentary about ocean conservation, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer anyway. "Hello, Mrs. Moretti." The voice was unfamiliar, male, cold, accented. "We need to talk about your husband." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what he's done, and what he's about to lose." The line went dead. Lucia stared at the phone, her heart suddenly pounding. She didn't tell Alessandro about the call. Not yet. 3 days after that, Matteo reappeared. He arrived at the penthouse unannounced, dressed impeccably, carrying a bouquet of white roses that looked expensive enough to feed a small village. Maria tried to stop him at the door, but Matteo de Rossi was not a man who could be easily stopped. "I heard about the hospital scare," he said, when Lucia appeared in the living room doorway. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." She accepted the roses, their scent overwhelming. "You shouldn't be here." "Because of him?" "Because it's complicated. It's only complicated if you let it be." Matteo stepped closer, his dark eyes searching her face. "Has he hurt you?" "Alessandro has never." "There are many kinds of hurt, Lucia." His voice dropped. "Not all of them leave marks." She didn't know what to say. The truth was she was tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of fighting. Tired of trying to figure out what she felt and what she wanted and who she could trust. "I should go back to bed," she said. "The doctor said." "I know." Matteo stepped back, respecting the distance. "But if you need anything at all, I'm here. Alessandro isn't the only one who wants to protect you." "Is that what this is? Protection?" His smile was small and dangerous. "Among other things." He left before Alessandro returned. But Lucia couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. Something dangerous and irreversible. The confrontation happened that night. Alessandro found the roses. He stood in the living room, holding one white bloom between his fingers, his face carved from stone. He was here. Lucia didn't deny it. He brought flowers. "He's not welcome in my home." "Your home?" She laughed bitterly. "I thought it was our home." "It is. Which is why I don't want him anywhere near it." Alessandro dropped the rose, crushing it beneath his heel. "Or near you. You don't get to make that decision. I'm your husband. You're the man who abandoned me." The words exploded from her chest, all the rage and pain she'd been suppressing finally breaking free. "You left me pregnant and alone while you paraded around Milan with your mistress. You humiliated me in front of everyone. And now you're jealous? Now you want to protect me? Now you want to play the concerned husband? She was shaking. Tears streamed down her face without permission. Alessandro crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her shoulders. Yes, he said. I'm jealous. I'm terrified. I'm furious at myself and at him and at every single moment I wasted on someone who didn't matter when I should have been here with you. His grip tightened. I know I failed you. I know I broke something that might never heal. But I am not letting another man take what's mine. I'm not property. You're not property. You're everything. His voice cracked. You're the only person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth loving. And I threw that away because I was too stupid and too afraid to accept it. Lucia stared at him through her tears. Afraid of what? Of needing you. His forehead dropped to hers. Of wanting you so much that losing you would destroy me. So you destroyed me first? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Yes. And I will never forgive myself. They stood there, breathing together, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. I don't know how to trust you again, she said. Then let me earn it. Day by day, moment by moment, however long it takes. And if it takes forever? His hands moved to cup her face, gentle now, trembling slightly. Then I'll spend forever trying. 2 nights later, the phone rang again. Same blocked number. Same cold voice. Did you tell your husband about our last conversation? Lucia's blood ran cold. What do you want? Revenge. A pause. But not against him. Against both of you. Your daughter will make excellent leverage. The line went dead. This time, Lucia screamed for Alessandro. The sound of her scream tore through the quiet of the penthouse like a physical blade. Alessandro didn't just walk to her room. He moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a man who had spent his entire life anticipating violence. He crossed the marble hallway in seconds, his heart slamming against his ribs, his mind already cycling through a dozen catastrophic scenarios. When he burst through the door, Lucia was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face drained of all color. Her hands were clamped over her mouth, her hazel eyes wide and fixed on the phone trembling in her lap. Lucia. He was at her side in an instant, dropping to his knees so he was looking up at her. What happened? Are you hurt? She shook her head frantically, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The baby, she gasped, her voice breaking. He said they would use her. He said she was leverage. Alessandro's blood turned to ice. The desperate, remorseful husband who had been begging for her forgiveness vanished. In his place, the head of the Moretti syndicate rose to the surface. His gray eyes darkened to the color of a stormy sea. His posture shifted, his shoulders broadening, his presence suddenly filling the room with an oppressive, dangerous weight. Give me the phone, he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Lucia handed it to him with shaking fingers. Alessandro checked the call log. Blocked number. Burner protocol. He pulled out his own phone and dialed a single contact. Enzo, Alessandro said the moment his right-hand man answered. Lock down the building. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. Pull the security feeds for the last 48 hours and run a trace on a blocked call that just hit this device. I want a name in 10 minutes. He hung up without waiting for a response. Who was it? Lucia whispered, her hands moving instinctively to cradle her swollen belly. Alessandro. Who knows about the baby? Someone trying to exploit a perceived weakness, he said, standing up and gently guiding her back against the pillows. He pulled the duvet over her, his touch remarkably gentle for a man whose mind was currently orchestrating violence. My public distractions over the last few months made the family look vulnerable. Rivals smell blood in the water. Because of Serena, she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Because of my stupidity, he corrected fiercely. He sat on the edge of the mattress, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. But I am not distracted anymore. Do you understand me? I am entirely, completely focused on you. No one is touching you. No one is touching our daughter. Lucia looked into his eyes, searching for the man who had walked out on her. But that man was gone. The man looking back at her was a monster to the rest of the world, but he was her monster. And right now, he was the only thing standing between her and the dark. "Stay with me," she whispered, the exhaustion of the pregnancy and the terror of the threat finally catching up to her. "I'm not going anywhere," he vowed. He stayed. He sat in the armchair beside her bed for the rest of the night, his phone buzzing constantly with encrypted messages, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Every time she stirred in her sleep, he leaned forward, watching her breathe, standing guard over the only things in his life that actually mattered. The next morning, the penthouse was transformed into a fortress. Armed guards stood at the elevator banks. The security shutters on the lower floors were engaged. Maria, the housekeeper, moved through the rooms with a tight, worried expression, bringing Lucia warm broth and herbal tea. Alessandro had set up a temporary command center in the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was covered in laptops, tablets, and scattered files. Enzo, a broad-shouldered man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stood by the window, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Lucia watched them from the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe. She had never seen this side of his life up close. Alessandro had always kept his business strictly separated from their marriage. He had wanted her to be his sanctuary, his pure, untouched escape from the violence of his world. But seeing him now, commanding, ruthless, his mind working like a tactical supercomputer, she realized how foolish it had been to think she could ever truly be separated from who he was. "The Vieri family," Enzo was saying, his voice carrying down the hall. "They've been pushing into the southern shipping routes for months. They think you're compromised. They think the scandal with the Valenti woman made you soft. The call was a probe, boss. They're testing your reaction time." Alessandro didn't look up from the tablet in his hands. If it was just a probe, they wouldn't have mentioned the child. "They have inside information. Someone in my inner circle is leaking details about my private life. We're sweeping the staff," Enzo said. "But boss, if the Vieri are making moves, they won't stop at phone calls. They'll try to take a physical asset. Something you can't replace." Alessandro's head snapped up. His gray eyes locked onto Lucia standing in the doorway. "She is not an asset," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that made Enzo physically take a step back. "She is my wife, and if the Vieri so much as look in her direction, I will burn their entire operation to the ground." Lucia felt a shiver trace down her spine. It wasn't fear of him. It was the terrifying realization of how much power he wielded, and how entirely it was now directed at protecting her. She stepped into the room. "You can't fight a war while I'm trapped in this apartment, Alessandro. I can and I will. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow," she reminded him, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Dr. Ricci needs to check my blood pressure and the baby's positioning. I can't skip it because of a threat." Alessandro ran a hand through his dark, brushed-back hair, the light stubble along his jaw catching the morning light. He looked exhausted, but his mind was already recalculating. "We'll move the appointment," he said. "I'll have Dr. Ricci come here. She doesn't make house calls for routine checks. She needs the ultrasound machines at the clinic." Lucia crossed her arms. "I am not going to let them dictate my life, Alessandro. If I hide now, I'll be hiding forever. Take me to the clinic. Bring your men. Let them see that you are not compromised." He stared at her for a long moment. The old Alessandro would have simply ordered her to stay. He would have used his authority to override her. But this Alessandro, the one trying to earn her back, nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "We go to the clinic. But we do it my way." The preparation for the clinic visit was a masterclass in paranoid logistics. 3 SUVs, 6 armed men, a decoy vehicle sent out an hour early to draw out any potential watchers. Alessandro insisted on driving the primary vehicle himself, refusing to let anyone else sit behind the wheel when his wife was in the back. Lucia sat in the rear seat, the tinted windows hiding her from the Milan streets. Alessandro sat beside her, his left hand resting on his thigh, his right hand firmly holding hers. His thumb stroked her knuckles in a slow, rhythmic motion that betrayed the tension coiling beneath his skin. "You're quiet," he murmured, his eyes scanning the traffic ahead. "I'm thinking about Serena," she said softly. Alessandro's hand stilled. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "Why?" "Because if the Vieri family thinks you're weak because of her, she's still a liability. She's still out there, talking to people, living in the penthouse you bought her, wearing the jewelry you gave her." Lucia turned her head to look at him. "As long as she exists in your orbit, they will use her to get to me." Alessandro's grip on her hand tightened. "Not enough to hurt, but enough to anchor her. She doesn't exist in my orbit anymore. I told you it's over." Saying it's over and making it over are two different things. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening into stone. He answered it on speaker. "What?" he barked. "Boss, it's Enzo," the voice crackled. "She's at the front gates of the estate. She's demanding to see you. Says she saw the security lockdown on the news and she's worried." Lucia closed her eyes. "Serena, tell the guards to turn her away," Alessandro said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "We tried, boss. She's making a scene. There are paparazzi lingering near the perimeter. She's crying, saying you promised her." "I don't care if she's bleeding," Alessandro interrupted, his tone so cold it could have frozen the air in the car. "If she doesn't leave in 30 seconds, have the guards physically remove her." "And Enzo?" "Yes, boss. Revoke her access to the black card. Change the locks on the apartment in Brera. Have her things packed and sent to her mother's house in Como. She is no longer under Moretti protection. If the Vieri want to use her, let them. She means nothing to me." He hung up. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with the finality of his words. Lucia looked at him, really looked at him. There was no hesitation in his gray eyes, no lingering attachment. He had severed the tie with the same ruthless efficiency he used to dismantle rival businesses. "Thank you," she whispered. Alessandro turned to her, his expression softening just a fraction. "You never have to thank me for doing what I should have done months ago." She was a distraction, a foolish, empty distraction. "You are my life, Lucia. There is no comparison." For the first time since the night he left, Lucia felt the ice around her heart crack just a little more. The clinic visit went smoothly. Dr. Ricci confirmed the baby was growing perfectly, her heartbeat strong and steady. The early labor scares had subsided, but the doctor reiterated the need for low stress. Alessandro stood by the examination table the entire time, his hand resting lightly on Lucia's shoulder, his eyes fixed on the monitor as their daughter's profile appeared in grainy black and white. When they returned to the penthouse, the atmosphere was lighter. The threat of the Vieri family still loomed, but the immediate danger felt manageable. That evening, Lucia was resting in the living room, reading a book, when the private elevator chimed. She frowned. Enzo was supposed to be the only one with access tonight. The doors slid open, and Matteo de Rossi stepped out. Lucia gasped, dropping her book. Matteo looked entirely out of place in the heavily guarded Moretti penthouse, yet he moved with the relaxed grace of a man who owned every room he entered. He wore a dark charcoal suit, his deep brown eyes calm and observant. "How did you get past my guards?" she asked, standing up slowly, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "I asked them nicely," Matteo said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. "And I brought a peace offering for your husband." Before Lucia could process that, Alessandro emerged from his study. He stopped dead in his tracks, his hand dropping instantly to the holster at his hip beneath his suit jacket. The air in the room plummeted by 10 degrees. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now, De Rossi," Alessandro said, his voice a low, lethal drawl. Matteo didn't flinch. He slowly raised his hands, showing they were empty, and reached into his jacket pocket with 2 fingers. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy cardstock and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "Because I just handed you the Vieri family's entire Southern logistics network on a silver platter," Matteo said smoothly. Alessandro's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to Matteo. What is this? The Vieri boss, Carlo Vieri, is meeting with his capos at a villa in Lake Como tomorrow night. That paper has the exact coordinates, the security rotation, and the names of the 3 men in his inner circle who are willing to flip for the right price. Matteo adjusted his cuffs. It's everything you need to dismantle his operation before he even realizes he's under attack. Alessandro stepped forward, picking up the paper. His gray eyes scanned the information, his mind instantly recognizing the tactical goldmine he was holding. Why? Alessandro asked, looking up. Why give me this? You've been trying to take the southern routes for 2 years. Matteo's dark eyes shifted to Lucia. His expression softened, losing its predatory edge. Because Carlo Vieri threatened a pregnant woman. There are rules in this world, Alessandro. Even monsters have lines they don't cross. When Vieri crossed it, he made himself an enemy to both of us. Alessandro stepped between Matteo and Lucia, his broad shoulders blocking his rival's line of sight. It was a primal, deeply possessive gesture. I don't need your help to handle Vieri, Alessandro said. No, you don't, Matteo agreed easily. But taking this intel saves you 3 days of surveillance. 3 days where your wife is at risk. Swallow your pride, Moretti. Take the win. Protect your family. The silence stretched, taut as a piano wire. Lucia watched the 2 men. They were apex predators, circling each other in her living room. Alessandro was pure, controlled fury. Matteo was calm, calculating ice. But both of them, in their own twisted ways, were trying to keep her safe. Take it, Alessandro, Lucia said softly. Alessandro glanced back at her, surprised by her intervention. If it keeps us safe, take it, she repeated, her hazel eyes steady. Alessandro turned back to Matteo. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. If this is a trap, De Rossi, I will end you. If it's a trap, I'll hand you the gun myself, Matteo replied. He looked past Alessandro, meeting Lucia's eyes one last time. Take care of yourself, Lucia, and make sure he does too. With that, Matteo turned and walked back to the elevator. The doors closed, leaving a heavy, charged silence in his wake. Alessandro let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. I hate him. I know, Lucia said, walking over to him. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing the lapel of his black suit. But he just gave you the weapon you needed. Use it. Alessandro looked down at her hand on his chest. He covered her fingers with his own, pressing her palm flat against his heart. It was beating fast. I'm going to end Vieri tomorrow night, he said quietly. And when it's done, no one will ever threaten you again. The takedown of the Vieri family was swift, brutal, and entirely off the books. Alessandro left the penthouse at midnight. He kissed Lucia's forehead, his lips lingering against her skin, and promised he would be back before she woke. Lucia didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room, watching the rain lash against the windows, her mind playing out 100 different nightmares. She knew what her husband was. She knew the violence he was capable of. For 3 years, she had willfully ignored the blood on his hands because he had always been so gentle with her. But tonight, the violence was coming to their doorstep, and she couldn't look away. At 4 a.m., the elevator chimed. Lucia stood up, her heart in her throat. The doors opened. Alessandro stepped out. He was breathing heavily. His black suit jacket was gone. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and there was a dark, wet stain blooming across his left shoulder. Lucia gasped, rushing forward. Alessandro, I'm fine, he grunted, catching her before she could collide with his injured side. It's a graze. Just a graze. Enzo is handling the cleanup. You're bleeding, she said, her voice pitching up in panic as she looked at the dark stain. Lucia, look at me. He cupped her face with his right hand, his gray eyes locking onto hers. I'm fine. Vieri is done. His capos flipped. The threat is neutralized. It's over. She stared at him, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright for hours suddenly evaporated, leaving her weak and trembling. "You promised you'd be back before I woke up?" she whispered, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. "I know." He pulled her gently against his good side, burying his face in her chestnut hair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He guided her to the sofa, sitting down and pulling her into his lap. Lucia didn't resist. She curled against him, careful of his shoulder, and for the first time in months, she let herself be held. Enzo arrived 10 minutes later with a private medic. The medic cleaned and stitched the graze on Alessandro's shoulder while Lucia watched, her face pale but her eyes fierce. When the medic left, Enzo lingered by the door. "Boss," Enzo said quietly, "there's one loose end. The leak in the inner circle. We found him." Alessandro's arm tightened around Lucia. "Who?" "Fabrizio, one of the junior accountants. He was feeding Vieri information about your schedule and the pregnancy. We have him at the warehouse." Alessandro's face went completely blank. The transition from husband to executioner was instantaneous. "Tell the men to wait for me." "No," Lucia said. Both men looked at her. Lucia sat up, sliding off Alessandro's lap. She looked at her husband, seeing the dark, murderous intent in his eyes. She knew what happened at the warehouse. She knew men didn't come back from it. "You're injured," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "You've done enough tonight. Let Enzo handle it. Please, Alessandro, don't leave me again tonight. Not like this." Alessandro stared at her. The war inside him was visible, the need to exact personal vengeance warring against his desperate need to stay by her side. He looked at Enzo. "Handle it. Make it clean. And make sure he never speaks again." "Understood, boss." Enzo nodded and slipped out the door. When they were alone, the silence of the penthouse rushed back in. Alessandro stood up, wincing slightly as his shoulder pulled, and held out his right hand to her. "Come to bed," he said softly. The master bedroom was bathed in the soft, silver light of the pre-dawn sky. Lucia stood by the window, looking out at the sleeping city. She was wearing a silk nightgown that draped elegantly over her pregnant form. Her long chestnut hair tumbled down her back in loose waves. She looked ethereal, untouchable. Alessandro stood in the doorway, watching her. He had changed into dark sweatpants, his bandaged shoulder bare. He felt entirely unworthy of the woman standing in his room. "You're staring," she said without turning around. "I'm memorizing," he replied, stepping into the room. "I spent 6 months looking at things that didn't matter. I'm making up for lost time." Lucia turned to face him. The emotional walls she had built so carefully over the last few months were crumbling, brick by brick. The terror of the threat, the relief of his return, the sight of his blood. It had all stripped away her defenses. "I was so angry at you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you left, I was so angry that I couldn't breathe. And then the anger turned into this cold, hollow ache. I convinced myself I didn't need you. I convinced myself I was better off." Alessandro stopped a few feet away from her, his hands hanging at his sides. He didn't interrupt. He just let her speak. "But when that man called, when he threatened our baby," she wrapped her arms around her stomach, her hazel eyes shining with unshed tears. "I realized I was terrified, not just for her, but for you. I was terrified that you would die out there, and the last thing I ever said to you would be that I didn't trust you." "Lucia, don't," she choked out, a tear finally falling. "Just let me say it. I was so lonely, Alessandro. I was carrying our child, and my husband was with another woman, and I was so profoundly, deeply lonely. It broke me. It broke something inside me that I don't know how to fix." Alessandro closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her yet. He just stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You don't have to fix it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me fix it. Let me spend the rest of my life putting the pieces back together." "I don't know if I can go back to how it was," she whispered. "I don't want you to," he said fiercely. How it wasn't good enough. I took you for granted. I thought having you was enough, so I stopped trying. I stopped showing you. I want to build something new, Lucia. Something real. Something where you never have to wonder if you're the only woman in my world. He slowly raised his hand, his knuckles lightly brushing the wet track of a tear on her cheek. His touch was reverent, worshipping. I love you, he said. The words were raw, torn from his chest. I have loved you since the moment I saw you at that gala. I was just too arrogant and too stupid to know how to hold on to it. But I know now. I know now, and I will never let you go again. Lucia looked up into his gray eyes. She saw the regret, the obsession, the desperate, consuming love that had driven him to tear apart a rival family just to keep her safe. She reached up and placed her hand over his, pressing his palm against her cheek. Show me, she whispered. Alessandro's breath hitched. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. It wasn't a demanding kiss. It was a question, a plea. When she parted her lips and let him in, a sound tore from his throat, something between a groan and a prayer. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His hand tangled in her thick chestnut hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss. It tasted like salt and forgiveness and months of starved, desperate longing. Lucia's hands moved to his chest, feeling the heavy, rapid thud of his heart beneath her palms. She mapped the hard lines of his torso, her fingers tracing the edge of the bandage on his shoulder, grounding herself in the reality that he was here. He was alive. He was hers. He broke the kiss only to trail his lips down her jaw, pressing open-mouthed kisses to the sensitive skin of her neck. You're so beautiful, he murmured against her pulse. So incredibly beautiful. He scooped her up into his arms, mindful of his injured shoulder, and carried her to the massive bed. He laid her down against the dark silk sheets, following her down, his body caging hers in a protective, possessive embrace. There was no rush, no frantic tearing of clothes. Every touch was deliberate, heavy with the weight of their reconciliation. He unbuttoned her silk gown with slow, trembling fingers, his gray eyes dark with a reverence that made her breath catch. When his skin finally met hers, the heat was electric. He moved over her, his weight supported on his right arm, his left hand gently cradling the curve of her pregnant belly. He pressed a kiss to her stomach, right over the spot where their daughter was sleeping. My girls, he whispered against her skin, his voice breaking. My entire world. Lucia pulled him up, tangling her fingers in his dark, brushed-back hair, and drew his mouth back to hers. The rest of the world faded away. The mafia, the rivals, the betrayals. None of it existed in the quiet dark of their room. There was only the slide of skin against skin, the mingled breaths, the quiet, desperate sounds of two people finding their way back to each other. When the crest finally came, it was slow and shattering, leaving them both breathless and tangled together in the sheets. Alessandro held her tightly against his chest, his face buried in her hair, his heart beating a steady, reassuring rhythm against her back. For the first time in 6 months, Lucia closed her eyes and felt completely, entirely safe. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in Alessandro's devotion. He didn't just stay in the penthouse, he restructured his entire life around it. He moved his primary office to the study down the hall. He attended every single doctor's appointment. He read pregnancy books until he could quote them verbatim. He rubbed her swollen feet every night without being asked. The underworld of Milan watched in stunned silence as the ruthless Moretti Don transformed into a fiercely devoted family man. The rumors of his affair died completely, replaced by whispers of his terrifying, obsessive protection of his wife. Serena Valenti vanished from the public eye. Stripped of her allowance, her apartment, and her status, she quietly left Milan for a small town in the south, her glamorous life reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in high society salons. Matteo de Rossi kept his distance. True to his word, he stepped back, focusing his syndicate's efforts on the northern territories, leaving the south entirely to Alessandro. The rivalry remained, but the venom was gone, replaced by a grudging, silent respect. As Lucia's due date approached, the penthouse was transformed. The nursery was fully stocked, the staff was trained in infant care, and the security was tighter than a bank vault. The public claim came at the annual Moretti Syndicate Winter Gala. It was the most important social event of the underworld calendar. Every boss, every capo, every politician on the Moretti payroll was in attendance. In previous years, Alessandro had attended alone or with a discreet date. This year, he arrived with his wife. The ballroom of the Palazzo Real fell dead silent when the grand doors opened. Lucia stepped inside on Alessandro's arm. She was 38 weeks pregnant, her body heavy and radiant. She wore a custom-designed gown of deep midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves and flared softly at the bottom. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, but it was her presence that commanded the room. She held her head high, her hazel eyes calm and regal. Alessandro stood beside her, a towering figure in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His dark hair was brushed back, his jawline sharp, his gray eyes sweeping the room with a daring, challenging glare. His hand rested possessively, proudly, on the small of her back. He didn't just walk her into the room. He presented her. As they moved through the crowd, Alessandro stopped at every table. He introduced Lucia not just as his wife, but as the future matriarch of the Moretti family. He forced hardened criminals and corrupt politicians to bow their heads and kiss her hand. Anyone who disrespects her, Alessandro announced to the room, his voice carrying over the quieted orchestra, disrespects me, and you all know how I handle disrespect. The message was received. The room erupted into polite, terrified applause. Lucia squeezed his arm, leaning into his side. You didn't have to do that, she murmured, a small smile playing on her lips. Yes, I did, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. They need to know that you are the true power behind the throne. They need to know that if they ever look at you sideways, I will end them. You're dramatic, she teased. I'm in love, he corrected. They danced slowly in the center of the floor, oblivious to the hundreds of eyes watching them. Alessandro held her close. His hand splayed protectively over her belly. Thank you, she whispered against his chest, for bringing me back. You brought yourself back, he said softly. I just cleared the path. 3 days later, the path led to the hospital. It started at 2 a.m. A sharp, undeniable pain that tore Lucia from a deep sleep. She gasped, her hands gripping the sheets. Alessandro was awake instantly. Lucia? What is it? It's time, she breathed, her eyes wide. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Alessandro called the doctor, summoned the car, and practically carried Lucia to the elevator. His face was pale, his jaw locked in tight concentration, but his hands were incredibly gentle. At the hospital, the private maternity wing was cleared out. Dr. Ricci and a team of top-tier specialists were waiting. Labor was long and grueling. 14 hours of intense, exhausting work. Lucia was a warrior, breathing through the contractions. Her grip on Alessandro's hand so tight her knuckles turned white. He never left her side. He wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, whispered encouragement in her ear, and glared at anyone who tried to offer her pain medication she didn't want. You're doing perfectly, he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers during a particularly brutal wave. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. Just a little more, amore mio. Just a little more. When the moment finally came, the room went quiet except for the sound of Lucia's final, powerful push. And then a cry. A loud, indignant, beautiful cry that filled the room and shattered the last remaining pieces of Alessandro's guarded heart. It's a girl, Dr. Ricci announced, her voice thick with emotion. A perfect, healthy baby girl. They cleaned her quickly, wrapping her in a soft white blanket, and placed her on Lucia's chest. Lucia sobbed. She wrapped her arms around the tiny, warm bundle, pressing her face into the soft fuzz of her daughter's dark hair. She looked up at Alessandro, her hazel eyes shining with tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Alessandro fell to his knees beside the bed. He reached out with trembling hands, his large fingers gently stroking the baby's impossibly small cheek. The baby turned her head, her tiny mouth opening in a yawn, and Alessandro let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Lucia, she's perfect. She has your eyes," Lucia said softly, exhausted but glowing. Alessandro looked up at his wife. He saw the sweat on her brow, the exhaustion in her face, the absolute, radiant love in her eyes. He leaned forward and kissed her, deeply and thoroughly, pouring every ounce of his gratitude and devotion into the touch. "Thank you," he said against her lips. "Thank you for her. Thank you for staying. Thank you for forgiving me." "I love you," she whispered back. Alessandro stood up, looking down at his wife and his daughter. The feared head of the Moretti syndicate, the man who ruled Milan with an iron fist, was entirely, completely brought to his knees by the two females in the bed. "What should we name her?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Lucia looked down at the baby, tracing the delicate line of her jaw. "Elena, after my mother." Alessandro nodded, a profound respect in his gray eyes. "Elena Moretti. It's perfect." 6 months later, the penthouse was filled with the soft, golden light of a Milanese afternoon. The grand piano in the living room was playing a gentle lullaby, though no one was sitting at the bench. It was a recording, playing softly from the speakers. Lucia sat on the plush velvet sofa, a book resting in her lap. She looked different now. The soft elegance of her pregnancy had transitioned into a refined, striking beauty. Her chestnut hair was cut into a chic, shoulder-length style, and she wore a simple but exquisitely tailored cream dress. In her arms, baby Elena was sleeping peacefully, her dark hair curling at the nape of her neck, her long eyelashes resting against her chubby cheeks. The elevator chimed. Alessandro stepped out. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, his tie loosened, his top button undone. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from running a massive criminal empire, but the moment his gray eyes landed on Lucia and the baby, the tension melted from his shoulders. He crossed the room silently, his footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. He sat on the edge of the sofa, leaning in to press a soft kiss to Elena's forehead, and then a deeper, lingering kiss to Lucia's lips. "How was my girl's day?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Quiet," Lucia smiled, shifting the baby slightly. "She slept for 3 hours. I actually managed to read a whole chapter." Alessandro smiled, reaching out to trace the line of Lucia's jaw. "You look beautiful. You say that every day. Because it's true every day." He leaned back, his arm draping along the back of the sofa. "Enzo handled the port negotiations today. The southern routes are fully secured. Matteo sent a bottle of vintage Barolo as a congratulatory gift." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "Matteo sent us wine?" "He sent you wine." The note said, "To the woman who tamed the beast." I threw the note away, but I kept the wine. Lucia laughed, a bright, clear sound that made Elena stir slightly before settling back into sleep. "You're jealous of a bottle of wine." "I'm jealous of the air he breathes," Alessandro said, though there was no real heat in his words. "But I tolerate it, because he helped keep you safe." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lucia looked at it, her breath catching. "Alessandro, what is that?" "When we got married 3 years ago, I gave you a ring because it was expected," he said, his gray eyes locking onto hers with intense, unwavering focus. "I gave you a ring because it was what a Moretti boss gives his wife. But I didn't give you my soul. I didn't know how." He opened the box. Inside was not a diamond, but a stunning, intricate band of woven platinum and rose gold, embedded with a single, flawless hazel-colored sapphire. "I had this made," he said softly. "The platinum is for the strength you showed when I was too weak to see it. The rose gold is for the grace you showed when I was cruel. And the stone is because your eyes are the only thing I want to look at for the rest of my life." Tears pricked Lucia's eyes. She carefully handed the sleeping baby to Alessandro, who took her with practiced, gentle ease, cradling his daughter against his chest. Lucia took the ring from the box. She didn't wait for him to put it on her. She slid it onto her right hand, next to her wedding band. Fit perfectly. She reached out, cupping Alessandro's face, her thumb brushing over the light stubble on his jaw. "I don't need a new ring to know you love me," she whispered. "I see it every day. In the way you look at her. In the way you look at me. I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving it to you," Alessandro vowed, his voice fierce and absolute. "I will protect you. I will cherish you. I will never, ever walk away from you again." Lucia leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. "I know." They sat there in the golden afternoon light, the feared mafia boss and the woman who had brought him to his knees, holding their sleeping daughter between them. The rain outside had stopped. The storms had passed. Alessandro Moretti had lost his pride, his control, and nearly his mind. But as he looked at his wife and his child, he knew he had gained the only things that had ever truly mattered. He had finally learned how to love, and he would never let it go. 1 year later, the Moretti estate in Lake Como was bathed in the soft gold of a summer sunset. The villa sat perched above the glittering water, its stone walls draped in cascading wisteria, its gardens immaculate and fragrant with jasmine and roses. It was here, away from the chaos of Milan, that Alessandro had chosen to renew his vows. Not because the law required it, not because society expected it, but because he needed Lucia to know, in front of everyone who had ever doubted them, that she was his beginning, his end, and every breath in between. The ceremony was intimate. 50 guests, hand-selected. No business associates. No politicians. Only the people who had witnessed the worst of their story and believed in the best of their love. Lucia walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away. No family left to stand beside her. But she didn't need anyone to hold her up. She had learned how to stand on her own. Her gown was simple. Ivory silk that flowed like water, skimming her curves with quiet elegance. Her chestnut hair was swept into a soft chignon, a few loose tendrils framing her face. She carried a bouquet of white roses and trailing greenery, but it was her eyes that held the room captive. Hazel, warm, radiant, and fixed entirely on the man waiting for her at the altar. Alessandro stood in a perfectly tailored black suit, his dark hair brushed back, his gray eyes shining with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. His hands were clasped in front of him, but they were trembling. The most powerful man in Milan, brought to his knees by the sight of his wife walking toward him. When she reached him, he took her hands in his. "You came back to me," he whispered, his voice thick. "I never really left," she replied softly. "I was just waiting for you to find your way home." The officiant spoke the traditional words, but neither of them truly heard. They were lost in each other, in the journey that had brought them here, through betrayal and heartbreak and the slow, painful work of rebuilding trust. When it came time for the vows, Alessandro stepped closer, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Lucia," he began, his voice carrying across the silent garden. "I have done things in my life that I will never be able to undo. I have hurt people. I have destroyed enemies. I have walked through darkness without flinching." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But the worst thing I ever did was walk away from you." A tear slipped down Lucia's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "You didn't just forgive me," Alessandro continued. "You showed me what it means to be worthy of forgiveness. You showed me that love isn't about possession or control. It's about choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard, even when you're afraid." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I choose you, Lucia, today, tomorrow, for the rest of my life. I will never stop choosing you." Lucia's breath hitched. She squeezed his hands, grounding herself in his warmth. "Alessandro," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "You broke me. You broke something inside me that I thought would never heal." She watched his face crumple with guilt, and she reached up to cup his cheek. "But you also showed me that broken things can be rebuilt. That love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about fighting for each other, even when it hurts. She smiled, soft and radiant. I choose you too, not because I need you to survive, but because I want you beside me while I live. I want to build a life with you, a real life, full of mess and chaos and a little girl who has your stubbornness and my patience. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the guests. I love you, Lucia whispered, and I will keep loving you, for as long as you keep choosing me. Alessandro pulled her into his arms, not waiting for the officiant to finish. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, in front of everyone. A declaration and a promise and a seal on everything they had survived. When they finally pulled apart, the garden erupted in applause. But neither of them heard it. They only heard each other. Later that evening, the reception spilled across the villa's torchlit terrace. Lucia stood near the stone balustrade, looking out at the moonlit lake. The music was soft behind her, the laughter of guests a gentle hum. In her arms, 1-year-old Elena was half asleep, her dark curls pressed against her mother's shoulder, her tiny fingers clutching the pearl button of Lucia's gown. Alessandro appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He set them on the railing and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her gently against his side. She's exhausted, he murmured, looking down at their daughter. She danced with Enzo for 20 minutes, Lucia smiled. I think she wore him out more than he wore her out. Alessandro chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of Elena's head. She's a Moretti. We don't do anything halfway. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? Lucia asked quietly. Alessandro was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. Every day, he admitted. I think about the night I left. I think about the months I wasted. I think about how close I came to losing you forever. He turned her gently to face him, his gray eyes dark with intensity. And then I look at you, her, at the life we've built. And I know that every moment of pain was worth it, because it led me here. Lucia reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. No more walking away, she said softly. Never again, he vowed. He leaned down and kissed her, slow, deep, and full of promise. Above them, the stars burned bright over Lake Como, indifferent to the empires and enemies and battles below. But in the quiet of the terrace, wrapped in each other's arms, Alessandro and Lucia Moretti had found something more powerful than any dynasty. They had found their way home. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it moved you, made you feel something real, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps more stories like this reach people who need them. Until next time, take care of your heart.